As hopefully you know, there are 7 continents on planet Earth, and each one is different in one major form or another. Just as important, we have significant presences in 6 of the 7. The one we don't have a big presence in? Antarctica. The continent's known for being barren, near lifeless, and not an easy place to colonize, and thus we leave it alone outside of those who dare to brave the elements and go and explore it. And when they do, they find some interesting things. Allow us to show you 8 of the strangest things found in Antarctica. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Number 8. Meteorites. It may not seem so strange at first, but finding a meteorite in Antarctica is actually very important, mainly because they oftentimes shatter on impact with the planet, or if left exposed to the elements, they'll wither away, thus not letting scientists study them. But because of Antarctica's snowy tundra and cold temperatures, the meteorites that land there actually have a strong likelihood of surviving. A great example of this happened in 2015. NASA teamed up with Stanford University to go and search the ice continent for a meteorite that was said to have landed over a decade prior. The best part? It came from Mars, making it equally awesome and yet strange. When they looked into it, they found there were actually fossilized remains of ancient microbes from Mars, though some do dispute that. But still, finding a perfectly intact meteorite on Mars is special, and hopefully more can be found there. Number 7. Gamburtsev Subglacial Mountains. Think about a set of mountains for a second, okay? I want you to picture that mountain range being buried to the tips and beyond in snow and ice. That's exactly what's going on with the Gamburtsev Subglacial Mountains in Antarctica. This is a mountain range that is hundreds of millions of years old, and some even say billions, and yet they're buried in snow and ice on the continent. Just to give you a reference, the mountains themselves rise 10,000 feet into the air, but then there's 15,000 feet of ice and snow on top of those mountains. So you'll never see it unless you have an X-ray machine. It is very fitting that the initial results of Antarctica's Gamburtsev Province project are coming out 100 years after the great explorers raced to the South Pole, said Alexandra Isern, program director at the National Science Foundation. The scientific explorers of the Antarctica's Gamburtsev Province project worked in harsh conditions to collect the data and detailed images of this major mountain range under the East Antarctic ice sheet. The results of their work will guide research in this region for many years to come. What's also mystifying people about these mountains is that they still exist. Mountains erode over time, especially in the presence of ice and water, which breaks down the rocks, and yet these ones seem unfazed. How is that possible? We're still trying to find out. Number 6. The curious case of invertebrates. Life on Antarctica is minuscule, right? Well, no. What scientists discovered quite shockingly is that there is a plentiful race of creatures living within the snowy mounds of the continent, mainly invertebrates, or creatures without a spine. About 67 different kinds of invertebrates live on this frozen tundra. We'll never see them without examining the snow, but they're in bulk. There are the nematode worms, mites, the rotifer, the tardigrade, and the springtail. But knowing them isn't knowing the whole story for the record. You see, because of the temperature of the land, they aren't exactly living all the time. If the temperature goes above freezing point, they'll start to move around and go about their day. Yet when it drops, which is often, they'll hibernate for lack of a better term. Their hibernation can sometimes last up to months, and when they do thaw out, they'll move for like an hour before being frozen. Given all of this, it's possible there's even more life within the snow and ice and waters of Antarctica that we honestly haven't discovered yet, and that's quite strange indeed. Number 5. Dinosaurs. Around 70 to 200 million years ago, it's believed that dinosaurs once roamed around the realm of Antarctica, meaning that once upon a time the frozen continent was at one time tropical, something many scientists have been trying to prove. It's believed that Antarctica could have been at least 50 degrees warmer than it is right now. That's enough for some reptilian-like creatures to have lived there based on fossils found in the 1980s and beyond, which further establishes how full of life Antarctica likely was once upon a time. What else was there? How long did it take for Antarctica to go from tropical to frozen? These strange findings fuel questions that will take a long time to answer, no doubt. Number 4. Antarctic lakes. Water in Antarctica is a curious thing, because technically it's all around you when you're there because of the snow. But in terms of actual bodies of water, that was thought to be impossible. Then a man named Jonathan Kingslake found one, and then more. In 2010, he was observing a picture from Google Earth of Nevelesin ice shelf in Antarctica. When he did, he noticed that there were water channels that could clearly be seen. channels that would only exist if there was a lake around there. The idea of such a drainage system in Antarctica were long thought of as impossible because of the cold temperatures. But Kings Lake's discovery prompted a more rigorous search of Antarctica, and they found around 700 different drainage systems throughout the continent, each of them feeding a lake in one form or another. Some of the water even traveled 75 miles in order to reach the lake it was heading to. An 80-kilometer-long lake existing on the surface of the Earth without us really knowing about it is just itself incredible to me, noted Kings Lake. So why does this matter? Well, I think in the long run, this field of research will lead to improved sea level predictions, Kings Lake says. But we're at such an early stage, it's impossible for us to say whether predictions of sea level rise will be increased or decreased by this observation. Number 3. Petrified mammals. We asked the question earlier about what other kinds of animals might have lived in Antarctica, and in 2009, the fossilized remains of a mammal was discovered. It was about the size of a cat, yet was one that laid eggs. Further studies stated that it was an ancient mammal that lived back around 250 million years ago. The animal believed that Antarctica was the cooler place to go temperature-wise and thus left South Africa for it. So what kind of creature was it? And were there more fossils like this buried in the snow and ice? Number 2. Blood Falls. The Blood Falls, as they are known, is a waterfall coming out of the glacier in Antarctica that flows red, giving it its rather infamous nickname. The glacier in question is the Taylor Glacier, and the reason for its red coloring is rather simple in context, as long as you know the science. This particular glacier isn't just holding a bunch of ice together, it's also holding back an ancient body of water, one that is 2 million years old and filled with microbes and other things from days long gone by. When the glacier broke enough to let the water flow forth, no one exactly knows when this happened. The water that was sealed away was high in salinity, as well as heavy in iron. When you mix salt water with iron, then expose it to oxygen, you get oxygenation, which is what causes iron to rust. A similar effect happens here, and the result of this mixing is that you get a waterfall that looks blood red. The blood falls themselves are 5 stories high on the Taylor Glacier, and the waters actually flow rather slowly, which is why the ice is stained by the blood. Ironically enough, the reveal why the water was red was rather recent. There were many thoughts and theories as to why it happened, including algae being the cause. No matter how you look at it though, it looks like a literal blood fountain coming out of the ice in a place where stuff like this shouldn't happen, and that's strange. Number 1. 100-year-old whiskey. This is a true story, I promise. During an excavation, some archaeologists were shocked to find multiple crates filled with whiskey that had been under the ice for apparently 100 years. There are a few twists in this tale though. First off, because the team feared damaging the bottles, they waited 3 years for very special tools to be made so that they could extract the crates of ice without issue. Then, when the whiskey was extracted, the bottles were found to be intact. One of the workers looked to the scientist and said, "Would you like to try it?" The scientist refused, stating that it was more important for the whiskey to be studied than to be tasted. So what's stranger here, the fact this whiskey was found, or that no one drank it? You tell us. So what do you think? What do you think of this look at Antarctica and the various strange things that have been found there? Were you surprised by some of the things that have been found there? Did the signs of life shock you, given its frozen nature? Do you know of other things found in Antarctica that would fit on this list? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.